If you're a contractor or a project manager here in the UK, there's one acronym that can cause a whole lot of stress: IR35. So today, we're going to cut through all that noise and give you a straightforward guide to the off-payroll working rules. And most importantly, what's changing for the 2025/26 tax year. Now, this entire guide comes from a discussion put together by the specialists over at ProTax Accountant. These are the folks who are in the trenches, dealing with the real-world impact of these rules day in and day out. The classic question, right? If you're a contractor, you have definitely heard this one. It's the one that often brings on that little moment of panic, usually just as you're about to land a fantastic new contract. So how on earth do you find the right answer? Well, at its very core, IR35 is all about figuring out your employment status, but just for tax purposes. Is your limited company a genuinely separate business? Or are your day-to-day working practices so similar to an employee's that you should be taxed like one? That's really the heart of the matter. So here's our game plan to get you from that state of confusion to complete clarity. First, we'll dive into the rule changes. Then, we're going to break down the financial cost, walk you through a super practical status check, clarify what your client has to do, and wrap it all up with a simple action plan to keep you safe and sound. All right, let's kick things off with why this is so important right now. Because starting in April 2025, the whole landscape is shifting once again. And here it is, the single biggest change you need to know about. The responsibility for figuring out your IR35 status is moving. If your client counts as a small business, that decision is no longer on them. It's on you. And look, small business isn't just some vague term here. HMRC has a very strict test. Your client has to meet at least 2 of these 3 criteria. This means you actually need to know their numbers to know if the responsibility falls on your shoulders. And this is where it gets real. Take James. He just assumed he was fine based on how things were before. But when his client's size changed, that responsibility suddenly flipped back to him. HMRC took a look, disagreed, and bam, he was hit with a costly tax bill. The lesson here? Every single contract needs a fresh look. Okay, next up, let's talk about what really matters to most of us: the money. Because getting this wrong isn't just a paperwork headache, it can have a massive impact on your finances. So what's the big difference? Well, think of it like this. Inside IR35 means you get taxed at the source just like an employee, but you don't get any of the benefits like holiday or sick pay. Outside IR35 means you operate as a proper business, managing your own company and personal taxes. So if you do fall inside IR35, this is what you're looking at. These are the standard income tax bands for England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Your client or the agency will just deduct this straight from your pay through the PAYE system. And this is super important. Your tax rate is based on where you live, not where your client is. So if you're a resident in Scotland, you'll be on the Scottish tax bands, which have more levels and go all the way up to a top rate of 48%. Okay, let's put some real numbers on this to see the impact. Take Sarah, a project manager on an £80,000 contract. Being outside IR35 could mean an extra £7,000 in her pocket at the end of the year. That is a huge difference, and that is why getting your status right is so incredibly important. All right, since the financial hit can be so huge, you need a rock-solid process, right? So let's walk through a practical 7-step check to figure out exactly where you stand. So, the million-dollar question: how do you actually figure out your status? This isn't about guesswork or what you hope your status is. It's about having a clear, bulletproof method. Think of this as your personal IR35 toolkit, your checklist. It all starts with gathering your evidence, like contracts and emails. Then you use official tools to get an indication, and you really understand the core things HMRC looks for. And, critically, it ends with keeping perfect records. All right, let's quickly unpack these because they're the ones HMRC really cares about. Control is all about your independence. Substitution is a massive test for any business. Can you genuinely send a qualified replacement? And mutuality of obligation, or MU, just asks, are they expected to keep giving you work, and are you expected to take it? These are the questions you need to answer. Okay, but what if your client isn't a small business? What if they're medium or large? Well, in that case, the pressure isn't on you, it's on them, and they have very specific legal duties they have to follow. Your client has a legal duty to give you something called a Status Determination Statement, or SDS for short. And this isn't just a tick box exercise. It has to be a formal document that states their decision, and crucially, explains the reasons why they made it. Now, here's a number you absolutely need to remember: 45. If you get an SDS and you disagree with it, your client has just 45 days to respond to your dispute. If they miss that deadline, the tax liability can actually shift right back onto them. That's a really powerful protection for you. And don't think for a second that clients can just ignore this stuff. The penalties for getting it wrong are massive. This tech firm just wasn't following the process correctly, and it ended up with a bill for over £200,000. It really shows that clients have a very big incentive to get this right. Okay, we have covered a ton of ground. So let's pull all of this together into one simple, clear action plan to get you ready for 2025. Look, the absolute key here is to get ahead of this. Step 1, confirm your client's size. That tells you who's responsible. Then, you have to review not just your contract, but your actual working practices. Use tools like CEST and document the outcome. And remember, if HMRC ever comes knocking, that documentation is your best defense. Listen, IR35 is tricky, there's no doubt about it, and getting it wrong can be really costly. So if you're feeling even a little bit unsure about your status or what you need to do, the best thing you can do is get expert help. The team at Pro Tax Accountant lives and breathes this stuff, and they can give you the clarity you need. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. Is your business ready for April 2025? The rules are changing, and that deadline is getting closer. So take the time now to get your contracts and processes in order. That way, when April 2025 rolls around, you can be completely confident that you're prepared.